15 years ago, I bought 20 acres of paradise on the outskirts of what would become Sunset Hills development. Back then, it was just rolling pasture and ancient oak trees. The kind of place where you could hear yourself think, where the only sounds were wind through grass and cattle calling across the fields. My grandfather helped me dig the well that first summer. We went down 40 feet through clay and rock until we hit the sweetest water you ever tasted, clear as crystal, cold as mountain snow. That well became the heart of everything I built on this land. Every morning, I walked the fence line checking on my cattle and horses. The well pump hummed quietly in the background, a steady rhythm that meant life and stability. This was my sanctuary, a place where I had built something meaningful with my own hands. I work as a water quality inspector for the state, not the glamorous kind of job that impresses people at parties, but important work. I test water systems across 3 counties, making sure families have clean, safe drinking water. Most people do not think about where their water comes from until something goes wrong. That is where I come in. My ranch well was maintained to standards that exceeded most public water systems. I knew every pipe, every joint, every mineral level. This water sustained my family and my animals through drought and plenty. It was tested more regularly than the municipal supply that would eventually feed the houses going up around me. Change came slowly at first. Construction crews appeared beyond my fence line, clearing trees and leveling ground. Cookie-cutter homes rose like mushrooms after rain. Families moved in seeking their slice of the American dream. I watched them with cautious optimism, hoping these new neighbors would appreciate the character that made this area special. The Sunset Hills Homeowners Association formed about 2 years after the first houses were occupied. At first, they focused on reasonable things: mailbox standards, holiday decorations, basic property maintenance. I was not part of their HOA, but I respected their right to organize their community. Then the rules started expanding. Fence height restrictions that somehow applied to properties within view of the development. Noise ordinances that targeted agricultural activities. Parking regulations for work trucks. Each new rule seemed designed to creep closer to my property line. I attended a few HOA meetings as a courtesy, explaining my water rights and agricultural exemptions. Most neighbors were reasonable people who understood that ranches and suburbs could coexist peacefully. They appreciated having open space that would never become another strip mall. But not everyone shared that perspective. I began noticing someone taking pictures of my property from the road, measuring distances, making notes on a clipboard. A woman with perfectly styled hair and designer clothes that looked out of place in our rural setting. Her name was Margaret, and she was about to turn my peaceful life upside down. The morning she first crossed my fence line without permission, I was checking the water troughs. The cattle were drinking peacefully, tails swishing at flies. The well pump cycled on with its familiar sound. Everything was as it should be. That is when I heard her voice behind me, sharp and demanding. "Excuse me, we need to talk." Margaret marched across my property like she owned it, clipboard in hand, disapproval written across her face. Her perfectly manicured appearance clashed with the honest dirt and grass stains on my work clothes. "You must be the rancher," she said, making the word sound like an insult. "I am Margaret Patterson, HOA compliance officer for Sunset Hills." I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to be neighborly. "Nice to meet you. I am Jake. What can I do for you?" Her eyes scanned my property with the calculating gaze of someone looking for problems. "We have received numerous complaints about your agricultural activities, the noise from your animals, the appearance of your fencing. The impact on property values. Ma'am, I have been here 15 years. My property predates your development by over a decade. I have legal rights that may need to be re-examined, she interrupted. Times change. Communities evolve. What was acceptable in the past may not meet current standards. She pulled out a thick folder and began reading from it like she was delivering a legal verdict. Fence height violations, unpermitted structures, agricultural waste management concerns, and most concerning of all, questions about your water usage and well system. My blood pressure started rising. My well system is completely legal and properly maintained. I have all the permits and documentation. Do you? Margaret stepped closer to the wellhead, circling it like a predator. Because our research indicates significant regulatory gaps in rural water systems, contamination risks, environmental impact studies that may have been overlooked. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Ma'am, I work in water quality. I can assure you that my system meets or exceeds all requirements. Her eyes narrowed. You work in water quality. What exactly does that mean? I am a certified inspector. I test water systems professionally. Margaret made a note on her clipboard. Interesting. Well, working in the field and maintaining proper compliance are two different things. We will need to verify all your claims. Over the following weeks, Margaret became a constant presence. She drove by my property multiple times each day, always with that clipboard, always taking pictures. She measured the distance from my well to her property line. She photographed my animals drinking from their troughs like she was documenting evidence of a crime. The harassment escalated quickly. She filed complaints with the county about my fence height. She reported my truck for parking violations on my own property. She submitted noise complaints about my rooster crowing at dawn. But it was my water well that captured her obsession most intensely. She began asking pointed questions about permits and regulations. She wanted to know how much water I used daily. She demanded to see environmental impact studies that were never required when I installed the system. This well is grandfathered under agricultural exemptions, I explained during one of her impromptu visits. I have water rights that date back decades. Grandfathered rights can be challenged, Margaret replied coldly, especially when they threaten community safety and property values. The threats became more direct. She spoke about legal action and code enforcement. She mentioned lawyers and environmental violations. Her voice carried that particular tone of entitlement that cut through the morning air like fingernails on a chalkboard. I tried reasoning with her. I showed her documentation of my water testing. I explained the difference between agricultural and residential water usage. I pointed out that my well was actually cleaner than the municipal supply feeding her development. Margaret was not interested in facts. She was interested in control. My independence represented everything she could not tolerate. Your little ranch is an eyesore, she said during our final attempt at diplomatic conversation. It brings down the entire neighborhood. These families paid good money for homes in a quality community, not to look at farm animals and smell manure. Then maybe they should not have bought houses next to a working ranch, I replied. Her face flushed red. That attitude is exactly the problem. You think you can do whatever you want because you were here first. But times change. Laws change. And I am going to make sure your little operation comes into compliance with modern standards. That night, I knew the gloves were coming off. Margaret had found her mission in life, and that mission was destroying mine. What started as neighborly disagreement transformed into calculated warfare. Margaret launched a systematic campaign against my water usage, armed with half-truths and manufactured outrage. The first sign of escalation came when county inspectors started showing up at my gate. Not one or two visits, but a parade of officials with clipboards and serious expressions. Each one apologized for bothering me, but explained they were required to investigate complaints. Someone filed a report claiming illegal water usage, the first inspector explained. Says you are contaminating the neighborhood water supply. I walked him through my entire system, showed him permits dating back 15 years, explained the agricultural exemptions and water rights. He spent 2 hours documenting everything, then shook his head. Your system is cleaner than most municipal supplies I test, he said. Whoever filed this complaint does not know what they are talking about. But Margaret was just getting started. She knocked on every door in Sunset Hills, spreading stories about contamination and environmental damage that existed only in her imagination. Her voice echoed through HOA meetings as she painted me as a reckless polluter threatening their children's safety. That rancher is using thousands of gallons of untested well water daily, she told anyone who would listen. Runoff from his property could be contaminating our groundwater. Our children play in yards that might be poisoned by agricultural chemicals. I watched in disbelief as reasonable people began nodding along with her increasingly wild accusations. Fear is a powerful weapon, and Margaret wielded it expertly. Anonymous reports started appearing with multiple government agencies. The Environmental Protection Agency received complaints about illegal dumping. The Agriculture Department got reports of unpermitted livestock operations. The Health Department was told I was creating public health hazards. Each agency was required to investigate. Each investigation required hours of my time, explaining systems and permits I had maintained legally for years. Every inspector reached the same conclusion. My operation was not only legal but exemplary. But Margaret had learned to game the system. She documented everything from across the fence line with the dedication of a private investigator. She photographed my animals drinking from their troughs and labeled the pictures "contaminated water consumption." She took samples from puddles after rainstorms and claimed they were runoff from my property. Margaret created elaborate charts showing imaginary contamination patterns. She measured wind directions and claimed my dust was affecting air quality. She monitored my daily routines and filed noise complaints timed to create maximum disruption. The breaking point came when she discovered that my water usage was not subject to the same restrictions as the municipal supply feeding her development. During a severe drought, when her neighbors faced watering restrictions, my well continued providing unlimited clean water for my livestock. The look in her eyes when she realized I was beyond her immediate control was the look of someone who had found their life's purpose in destroying mine. "This is not fair," she declared during an impromptu visit. "Everyone else has to follow water restrictions, but you can use as much as you want. Your animals get unlimited water while our lawns are dying." "Ma'am, agricultural water rights are different from residential usage. My livestock need water to survive. Your lawn wants water to look pretty. The law recognizes that difference." Margaret's face turned red with rage. "We will see about that. I am filing complaints with every agency in the state. Someone will listen. Someone will stop this." She began making phone calls right from my property line, speaking loudly enough for me to hear every word. Complaints to the Water Authority about excessive usage. Reports to environmental agencies about contamination risks. allegations of permit violations and safety hazards. "Yes, I need to report an illegal water operation," she said into her phone, staring directly at me. "A rancher who is violating every environmental protection law in the books. Someone needs to shut this down before he poisons the entire neighborhood." The harassment reached fever pitch when Margaret realized that complaining to existing agencies was not getting her the results she wanted. Every inspector concluded that my operation was legal and properly maintained. Every test showed my water was cleaner than public supplies. That is when she made the decision that would change everything. If she could not get me through normal channels, she would manufacture an emergency that no one could ignore. Standing at my fence line with her phone in hand, Margaret looked at me with cold determination. "You think you are untouchable," she said, "but everyone has limits, everyone can be stopped, and I am going to find yours." The next morning, I would discover exactly what she meant. The morning that changed everything arrived with the wail of sirens cutting through the peaceful ranch air. I stepped out of my barn to see something that stopped me cold. A convoy of emergency vehicles racing down my gravel driveway like they were responding to a major disaster. Fire trucks, police cars, environmental response units, an ambulance, even a hazmat team, all creating a cloud of dust that settled like a bad omen across my property. My heart pounded as I tried to understand what was happening. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? Why were all these emergency responders racing toward my well? That is when I saw Margaret. She stood at her fence line with arms crossed and a smile of pure satisfaction, watching her masterpiece unfold. She had done this. Somehow, she had brought this chaos to my peaceful ranch. The lead officer approached me with professional urgency. "Sir, we received a 911 call reporting an environmental emergency at this location. Illegal dumping, water contamination, immediate danger to public health." My jaw dropped. There is no environmental emergency here. This is a working ranch with a legal well system. "That is what we need to determine," the officer replied. The caller reported chemical contamination threatening the entire neighborhood, children at risk, groundwater poisoning. We have to take these reports seriously. Behind him, the emergency response team was suiting up in protective gear. Hazmat suits for an imaginary contamination, air monitoring equipment for gases that did not exist, water testing kits for pollution that was never there. I looked toward Margaret's fence line and saw her pointing dramatically at my well, shouting instructions to anyone who would listen. "The contamination source is right there," she called out. "That illegal well has been poisoning our water supply for months. My children have been getting sick. The whole neighborhood is at risk." The officers approached my well with clipboards ready, prepared for the environmental disaster Margaret had described. Instead, they found a well-maintained system with clean facilities and healthy animals grazing peacefully nearby. I watched their expressions shift from concern to confusion to irritation as they realized they had been manipulated into responding to a non-emergency. "Ma'am," one officer called to Margaret, "can you show us evidence of this contamination?" "It is right there," she insisted, waving her arms wildly. "That illegal operation, thousands of gallons of untested water being used daily, runoff contaminating the groundwater, chemical waste from agricultural operations." The senior officer looked at me with growing skepticism about the emergency call. "Sir, do you have permits for this well system?" "Yes, sir. 15 years of documentation, all legal and properly maintained." As I walked them through my setup, showing permits and testing records. I could see their frustration building. These were professional emergency responders who had been pulled away from real emergencies to investigate Margaret's manufactured crisis. This is a clean, legal agricultural water system, the environmental specialist concluded after a quick inspection. No contamination, no environmental hazards. Whoever called this in either does not understand water systems or deliberately filed a false report. Margaret's performance became increasingly frantic as she realized her plan was backfiring. "You are not looking hard enough," she shouted. "The contamination is there. Test the groundwater. Check for chemical runoff. Someone needs to shut this illegal operation down." But the officers had seen enough. They began asking Margaret pointed questions about her knowledge of water systems and environmental regulations. Her answers revealed she knew nothing about the technical aspects she claimed were so dangerous. "Ma'am, filing false emergency reports is a serious offense," the lead officer warned. "These resources could have been responding to real emergencies while we investigate your claims." That is when I realized this was my moment. Margaret had finally overplayed her hand. She had wasted taxpayer resources, deployed emergency responders under false pretenses, and made accusations she could not support. As the officers began asking detailed questions about water systems and environmental regulations, I knew it was time to reveal exactly who Margaret had chosen as her enemy. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the credentials I had been carrying for over 15 years. The badge and identification that would change everything. "Officers," I said calmly, "I think there is something you should know about who you are talking to." Margaret's face went pale as she realized her war against the rancher was about to become something much more serious. The moment I pulled out my state water inspector badge and credentials, the entire atmosphere shifted like the barometric pressure before a storm. The responding officers straightened with new attention, their casual investigation transforming into professional respect. "Officers, I am Jake Morrison, certified state water quality inspector, license number WQ2847. I have been monitoring and maintaining water safety across 3 counties for 15 years." The senior officer examined my credentials carefully, then looked at me with new understanding. "You are a state water inspector?" "Yes, sir. I test municipal water systems, investigate contamination reports, and ensure compliance with environmental protection standards. My ranch well is not just legal. It is maintained to standards that exceed requirements for public water systems." I could see Margaret's face pale as the full weight of her mistake became clear. She had spent months harassing a state official whose job was protecting water quality. She had filed false reports about someone whose professional reputation was built on environmental protection. "Every system on my property has been designed and monitored by someone who literally wrote portions of the State Water Quality Manual," I continued. "The well she is complaining about is tested more frequently than the municipal supply feeding her development." The irony hung in the air like morning mist. Margaret had called 911 to report environmental crimes committed by someone whose career was dedicated to preventing exactly those crimes. "Sir," the environmental specialist asked, "what can you tell us about the claims made in this emergency call?" I pulled out my testing equipment and documentation. "I can show you 15 years of water quality reports, pH levels, mineral content, bacteria counts, chemical analysis. This water is cleaner than what comes out of most residential taps." Margaret's confident posture crumbled As she realized every accusation she had made could be professionally refuted by someone with expertise she could never challenge. But he is using thousands of gallons daily, she stammered. The environmental impact, the contamination risks. Ma'am, I replied calmly, agricultural water usage is my area of expertise. I monitor systems across the state that use far more water than my small ranch. There is no environmental impact from a properly maintained well system. The officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about wasted resources and false emergency calls. They had been pulled away from real emergencies to investigate claims made by someone who clearly did not understand the first thing about water systems. The contamination she claims to see does not exist, I explained. The illegal dumping she reported never happened. The immediate danger to public health is a figment of her imagination. She has filed false reports based on zero evidence and no technical knowledge. Margaret's desperate attempts to maintain her narrative became increasingly frantic. But someone needs to regulate these agricultural operations. Someone needs to ensure compliance with modern environmental standards. Someone does, I said quietly. That someone is me. I am the person the state sends to investigate water quality violations. I am the authority she has been demanding should shut down my operation. The senior officer turned to Margaret with growing irritation. Ma'am, you called 911 claiming an environmental emergency. You deployed fire trucks, police units, hazmat teams, and environmental specialists to investigate a state water inspector, whose job is preventing the very problems you claim to report. Margaret looked around desperately, realizing that every person on my property was now viewing her as the problem, not me. How was I supposed to know? She asked weakly. You could have asked, I replied. Instead of filing anonymous complaints and false emergency reports, you could have had a neighborly conversation. You could have requested to see my credentials and documentation. You could have learned about water systems before making accusations. The environmental specialist shook his head in disbelief. Sir, in your professional opinion, is there any environmental hazard present on this property? None whatsoever. This is one of the cleanest, best-maintained private water systems I have ever inspected, including my own professional evaluations. Margaret's desperate attempts to justify her actions only dug her deeper into trouble, but the agricultural operations, the impact on property values, the noise and smell. Ma'am, the lead officer interrupted, you called 911 reporting environmental crimes and public health emergencies. None of those claims appear to be valid. Filing false emergency reports is a serious offense that wastes public resources and diverts emergency responders from real crises. I could see the panic growing in Margaret's eyes as she realized the investigation had shifted from my ranch to her actions. Officers, I said calmly, as a state official, I would like to formally request that this incident be documented as a false emergency report filed against a government inspector in the course of his duties. That is when Margaret realized her war against the rancher had become something much more serious. She was no longer harassing a neighbor. She was interfering with a state official and filing false reports against someone whose professional credentials were beyond question. The tables had turned completely, and there was no going back. With my professional credentials established, I made an offer that Margaret could not refuse without appearing to hide something. Officers, as a certified state water inspector, I would be happy to conduct an official environmental compliance inspection of the entire area. This will settle all questions about water quality and environmental safety once and for all." The officers readily agreed, and Margaret found herself trapped by her own accusations. If she objected to the inspection, she would appear to be hiding environmental violations. If she agreed, she would face professional scrutiny from someone with actual expertise. "That sounds like an excellent idea," the senior officer said. "A thorough inspection by a qualified professional should resolve these concerns." I retrieved my official testing equipment from the house and began what would become the most satisfying inspection of my career, starting with Margaret's property. Her pristine lawn told a story that contradicted everything she had claimed about environmental protection. Soil samples revealed chemical applications within restricted distances of water sources, fertilizer and pesticide residues at levels that violated state environmental guidelines. "Ma'am, when did you last apply chemicals to your lawn?" I asked, documenting each violation with professional precision. Margaret shifted nervously. We have a lawn service, they handle all that." "Do you have documentation of what chemicals were applied and when?" Her silence spoke volumes. I photographed the evidence and recorded GPS coordinates for my official report. Moving to the HOA common areas revealed even more serious violations: unpermitted drainage modifications that could affect groundwater flow, retention ponds installed without proper environmental impact studies, landscaping projects that violated buffer zone requirements near natural water sources. "These drainage changes require environmental permits," I explained to the officers. "Altering natural water flow without proper studies can create exactly the kind of contamination risks this woman claimed to be concerned about." The most damning discovery was Margaret's own decorative pond system. Beautiful to look at, but installed without any of the permits required for artificial water features. The pond connected to natural drainage systems, creating potential contamination pathways that violated multiple environmental regulations. "This pond system creates more environmental risk than anything on my ranch," I documented. "Artificial water features require permits to prevent exactly the kind of contamination she accused me of causing." Each violation I discovered was photographed and recorded with professional precision: chain of custody procedures, GPS coordinates, detailed technical descriptions that would hold up in court. The officers watched with growing amazement as the tables turned completely. Margaret, who had spent months positioning herself as an environmental crusader, stood revealed as someone whose own actions violated the very laws she claimed to champion. "Ma'am," I said, pulling out my citation book, "as a state environmental inspector, I am required to document these violations and issue appropriate citations." Margaret's panic was visible now. "Wait, you cannot just— I mean, those were installed by contractors. I did not know about permits." "Ignorance of environmental law is not a defense," I replied. "Property owners are responsible for ensuring compliance with all applicable regulations." Her frantic attempts to explain away each violation only provided more evidence for my report. Every excuse revealed additional knowledge of regulations she had chosen to ignore. The same attention to detail she had used to harass me now worked against her, as I professionally documented every code violation on her property. The woman who had called 911 to report my environmental crimes now faced official citations for her own illegal activities. "The irony here is striking," I told the officers. "She filed false reports claiming I was contaminating the water supply, while her own property features multiple actual contamination risks that violate state environmental law. Margaret's desperation reached a crescendo as she realized the full scope of her legal exposure. "This is not fair. You are targeting me because I complained about your ranch." "Ma'am, I am conducting the same type of inspection I perform on properties across the state. The violations I have documented are clear and well established. Your ranch neighbor's compliance does not excuse your own violations." The senior officer made notes as I explained each citation: false emergency reporting, environmental violations, harassment of a state official. The list grew longer as the investigation continued. "Officers," I concluded, "as the certified water inspector for this region, I can confirm that the only environmental violations in this area are on the property of the person who filed the false emergency report." Margaret stood speechless as the weight of professional justice settled around her. Every tactic she had used against me was now being applied to her own actions, but with actual legal authority behind it. The woman who had tried to weaponize environmental law against me now faced the full consequences of actual environmental violations on her own property. Justice, it seemed, had a sense of irony. The final chapter of this water war unfolded with the methodical precision of professional justice. Over the following weeks, Margaret received a cascade of citations and legal consequences that made her harassment campaign look like child's play. The first citation arrived for false emergency reporting, a Class A misdemeanor carrying fines up to $5,000. The environmental violations on her property added another $12,000 in penalties. The unpermitted pond system required immediate remediation at her expense. But the real damage was to her reputation. Word spread quickly through Sunset Hills about the HOA compliance officer who had called 911 on a state water inspector. The same neighbors who had listened to her environmental crusade now learned she was violating the very laws she claimed to champion. I submitted my official report documenting the harassment campaign and its impact on government resources. 15 separate false complaints, hours of wasted inspector time, emergency resources diverted from real crises to investigate manufactured emergencies. The HOA faced its own reckoning. State investigators examined their pattern of harassment against agricultural properties. Board meetings that once focused on attacking my ranch now scrambled to address their own legal vulnerabilities. Margaret's influence evaporated overnight. The woman who had commanded attention at HOA meetings now found herself avoided by the very neighbors she had tried to protect. Her environmental expertise, exposed as complete fiction, became a neighborhood joke. "Did you hear Margaret tried to shut down a water inspector for water violations?" became the standard introduction to the story that spread through local social media groups. The legal consequences multiplied. Margaret faced potential criminal charges for filing false police reports. The district attorney's office reviewed her pattern of false complaints against a state official. Legal experts explained that targeting government employees in the performance of their duties carried enhanced penalties. Her lawyer tried to negotiate reduced charges by claiming ignorance of my professional status, but the documentation told a different story. Margaret had deliberately ignored my explanations of water systems expertise. She had escalated complaints even after being told she was targeting someone with professional credentials. The civil consequences were equally severe. I filed a harassment lawsuit documenting months of false reports and interference with my professional duties. The monetary damages sought exceeded the value of her house. Margaret's pristine lawn, the symbol of suburban perfection she had used to justify her crusade against my ranch, now featured a large excavation where her illegal pond system was being removed at county orders. The chemical contamination from her unpermitted fertilizer applications required soil remediation that left brown patches across her formerly perfect grass. The for sale sign appeared in her yard exactly 32 days after the 911 incident, a white flag of surrender planted in chemically damaged soil. Her realtor struggled to explain the environmental liens and pending legal actions to potential buyers. The disclosure forms required detailing false police reports, harassment lawsuits, and remediation requirements. The house that had once commanded premium prices for its HOA perfection now sat unsold for months. Meanwhile, life on my ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm. The well pump hummed with the same steady cadence it had maintained for 15 years. Clean water flowed to healthy animals grazing in green pastures, everything as it should be. But something had changed in the neighborhood dynamic. The actual good neighbors, the ones worth knowing, stopped by to apologize and learn about water conservation from someone who understood the science. We had no idea Margaret was making false reports, Tom from 3 houses down explained. When we learned you were a state inspector, everything made sense. She was always complaining about technical stuff none of us understood. Children from the development started visiting to see the horses and learn about ranch life. Their parents appreciated having real agricultural education next door instead of another cookie-cutter house. The HOA modified their policies to explicitly exclude pre-existing agricultural properties from their jurisdiction. Board meetings now included disclaimers about respecting established land use rights and agricultural operations. Margaret's replacement as compliance officer was a retired teacher who believed in neighborly communication over regulatory warfare. Her first act was delivering a formal apology from the HOA board and a request for educational presentations about water conservation. 6 months later, I received a letter from the State Environmental Agency commending my professionalism during the incident. My handling of false reports while maintaining inspector neutrality became a case study in their training materials. The morning silence returned to my ranch, broken only by familiar sounds of rural life. Cattle calling across pastures, horses nickering for breakfast, the gentle hum of my legal, clean, professionally maintained water well. Margaret's house finally sold at a significant loss to investors who planned to renovate and remediate. The new owners introduced themselves with homemade pie and questions about my horses. Standing on my porch at sunrise, watching mist rise from pastures watered by the well my grandfather helped me dig, I reflected on the lesson Margaret had learned too late. When you pick a fight with someone, it helps to know who you are fighting. Some battles are won not with anger or escalation, but with patience, professionalism, and the quiet confidence that comes from being exactly who you claim to be. The water still flows clear and clean. Justice, like good well water, is worth waiting for.